Because what does this go to? It's from 4:15 to when?
4:15 to 5:15.
Okay, because she said try to keep it short. So.
Well, I'm going to text her. Sorry, Joe.
Nah, it's okay. She probably got caught up in a meeting.
I know she has class right before this.
Yeah, she'll pull in at some point. She knows what I'm talking about anyway, so yeah. Oh, there she is. Yeah, she's right there. Hey, did you run over here?
You're saying time management, right?
Yeah, I told you. It's
All right. Welcome, everybody, on this beautiful day and Star Wars Day. Do I get to say it? May the
Yes.
4th be with you.
yes.
Well, and our last day of Weston Roundtable for this academic year. So welcome, everybody. The Roundtable meets every Thursday all academic year and is made possible by a generous donation from Roy Weston. His gift was intended to support community, research, and teaching in environmental sustainability, science, technology, and policy. So I see a lot of the class here, and I see a lot of other air quality friends here, and I think most of you all know that you can find Weston Roundtables on SAGE's website, which is SAGE, the Center for Sustainability and the Global Environment. We put on the Weston Roundtable and also the 1 credit hour class that goes with. This is also, of course, then the last class meeting as well. Just want to remind everybody that everything is due 1 week from today.
Everything.
Everything. That is the last moment, 1 week from today on the 11th. So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Tracy Holloway, my colleague at SAGE, and Grand Poobah of Air Quality here on Madison's campus, and she's going to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Carol, and so nice to see everyone here. It is such a pleasure to welcome Dr. Joseph Wilkins to UW-Madison. I think you've maybe been here before. No, this is your first time? Is that right?
First time, yeah.
Well, Joseph and I have worked together for really the decadal time period that he's talking about in his talk. He was a PhD student at St. Louis University working with Jack Fishman and Ben DeFoy on satellite data for air quality analysis, right when NASA first started thinking about how to make satellite data more relevant for energy decision making. And I think Joseph's career has really highlighted the potential to support analysis of wildfires, work with organizations like the EPA where he did his postdoc, and it's so exciting to hear about his current work at Howard University in Washington, D.C., linking together all of these huge, high-profile issues that he's been advancing for the past 10 years. So thank you so much for coming to visit.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Howdy, everybody. Welcome. Hope y'all can hear me just fine. We're going to get it rolling today. I'll try to be kind of time, but we'll see. So today, welcome to an exciting episode of Decadal Lessons about wildfires, air quality, and environmental justice. A little bit of spiel there. And as always, let's get to it. So I like to always start my talks off with my why, right? Because our why is important. And I tell people the reason why I got into air quality is because I was one of those kids that grew up with asthma. So I couldn't go outside every day when it came to what was actually in the atmosphere. So as a kid, if you can see this image here, this is what it looked like every day going to school. So I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky in Rubbertown. So if you can see these stars here, this yellow star is where my elementary school was. This purple star is where my middle school was. The red star is where my house was, right? So pretty much walking to school, if you can get the sense. And this essentially is about 60 to 70 active power plants and rubber plants and chemical generation places, right? So you can see I was right here breathing all that good stuff. And essentially my why in life is to fight these type of facilities and these type of places, these type of climate issues, as well as environmental issues that folks have to deal with. And so went to school to do this. And I mentioned here, this is posted on the University of Louisville's website because I was the first graduate of the atmospheric science program that they created in 2009. I graduated in 11 and then went to St. Louis, where I was funded underneath, as you can see, Dr. Holloway's great program there, to kind of fight this type of problem. So this was my actual dissertation topic itself, was fighting what I wanted to fight as a kid. So this is kind of my why and why it matters. So today we'll go to briefly the story of wildfires, kind of the state of air quality, and some environmental justice type implications and how it fits in with all that. So we'll start off with the story of wildfires, right? And so, again, this is the why part, right? A lot of people don't understand fully the magnitude of what we're facing here, and I like to hit upon that to everyone so we can know. I call it as we're running into the wall, right? Where there's a water issue, there's an air issue, and it will eventually become a life issue. So if you can look at these stats here, these are not so fun stats, right? We're talking about 7 million people in the U.S. who have waterborne diseases. As you know, Flint, Michigan is a good example there. There's a lot of other places like Louisville, right off the Ohio Valley right now, that just got a lot of chemical spills into the water. So this is something that actively happens all the time. And when it comes to air quality, about 10 million deaths annually, 60,000 in the U.S. alone. This is something that's all preventable. So that's why I say we need to be knowledgeable of these things. And then you can see the life impacts related to it. So if we're talking about 1 out of every 6 deaths on this planet is related to pollution, this is insane, right? So we need to work on that, and we need to figure out how we can address these issues. And we need to look at this from multiple standpoints, because for one, you can't eat money, so we have to figure out how to address things for human life. And we also have to realize that for those who only care about money, we're losing about $4.6 trillion to this type of issues. So if you only care about money, you're losing that. If you care about life, you're losing that too. So there's 2 fronts there. So a brief story of the wildfires. We created a team that's centered around wildfire-related issues. So this partnership kind of published several papers together and created several projects together. And that main synthesis was this kind of quote here, which I won't read out loud fully, but essentially is that things are getting really, really bad. And things will continue getting really, really bad. That's essentially what that quote says. And as you see this map, as you can kind of get a sense, for those who don't study wildfires every day, something on the planet is burning at all times, every single second, every single minute, every single day. And it will continue on well past when humans are here and well beyond. And so this is something we have to learn to live with. This is not something we should be afraid of. There's things such as fire-positive things, such as pine needles that have to reach a certain temperature to generate. There's certain things such as bison, which we all love to eat steaks. Well, some of us do. Some of you may be vegan, sorry. But for those steak eaters of us, we rely heavily on this because those things tend to be fire-positive. So if you've ever seen a fire happen in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, which I have, you'll see bison and deer running towards that fire. And why that is because they associate it with food. Because when that grass gets burned and it comes back up, it's highly nitrogen rich, which means it's really good for them to eat. So they tend to grow 3 to 4 times bigger and faster. And so this is really good for our ecosystem. So this is why fires are positive and we can't get rid of them. So the reason why I put up here this fact right here is that the huge issue is that most of these fires are started by people. So humans are now causing the main issue, which is these fires, right? So we have 87% on average. So last year was 87%, but it's usually at 90 or more. And so we have to worry about how we deal with this, and we have to go about it a different way. And we see here, we have quantified how PM 2.5 is responsible for this. So this is particularly a matter of a certain size that can get inside your lungs and cause issues. This, we know fires are responsible for about 40% of what we breathe in our atmosphere right now. So that's a lot. That's almost 50% of what we're breathing due to one particular source. And for ozone, we haven't fully quantified that yet. We have some guesses, which I'll go to later, but we haven't fully quantified it yet. And then there's, again, the multiple benefits. In the Forest Service, I like to talk about this. They're changing their mind. So if those of us who've seen Bambi, for example, or heard of Smokey the Bear, these are what I call propaganda. So I used to say the Forest Service used to vow to fight every fire that happened, and now we know that this is untrue and that we need to allow some fires to occur because we need them on the landscape. And so the last piece, which is the most important piece today, is that even though we know all this cool stuff, there's inequalities that exist with who breathes that pollution that's created. And this is where the forefront of environmental justice is kind of born, where even though we're all in the same landscape, we all don't receive the same chemistry the same. And so for those who don't study fires every day, I like to include some pretty schematics so you can get a sense of the magnitude of these things and how they look on the landscape. So you have prescribed burns on the left, wildfires on the right, and you can kind of get a sense of the purpose also. So if you have a small prescribed burn, it could burn a small patch, and it could prevent what's on the right, these large wildfires from firing up. And then also, if you look at the smoke that comes off of these things, it's a lot less. And so a lot less smoke to prevent a lot larger fire to get the same benefits ecologically is something we have to learn to maintain and balance. And this is kind of where my work comes into play, where it's like, how do we tease in what needs to be done ecologically with what needs to be done for a human standpoint? Like, we need fires to happen for them, for the ecology, for plants, animals, and we need it to happen for our ecology, and we need it to not happen for us to breathe and us to our homes and things. So how do we balance that? And so again, here's another schematic of just basically how air quality is related to this. So we know wildfires are typically unplanned. We can't really fight them as easily. We don't know where they are. Sometimes we figure out when they started several days later, and so they can kind of get out of hand. But prescribed burns, there's more control, there's more understanding. However, when it comes to modeling these things, it's reverse. So wildfires are large. We can detect them with satellites. We can detect them. Somebody can see them. And we can literally go out to do something about that. And in modeling context, since it's so large, it's easy to put into your system. It's easy to study it. It's easy to measure it. And prescribed burns, they burn on the order of 20 minutes to an hour. So it's really hard to measure that. It's really hard to capture it. So these are some of the issues that we're facing. How do you know which one is better if you can't really measure one of them, right? And then to give you a context of the magnitude, for example, in Kansas alone, there's about 1 million to 2 million acres that are burned by humans every year. And so this is a constant cyclical process that we need to maintain in a better way. And so I like to show this slide to let folks know how I tend to approach these issues. And I use a bunch of different measurement tools, modeling tools, and to cover the air, land, and sea, as well as, so it helps out with my colleagues at Howard as well as NASA and other places. And you can see the image to the right. We fly on this big old DC-8 plane, and some of you in the audience have seen this plane. And we tend to fly different cities, states, countries to kind of get these measurements of what's actually in the atmosphere. And then we have, it's kind of cut off, but there's a super cool boat, about a little bit bigger than, like 42 foot, I think it is. I could be wrong. But on this boat, we tend to go across the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Africa, and we take some measurements there so we can kind of get the vertical transects in the ocean. And then we also have drones that we can fly around at different places and locations to get air quality. And we also launch ozone sondes as well as radio sondes, which is weather balloons. So we can launch these as we see fit as well. And then we also have a really cool facility at Howard. We have a flux tower, Doppler radars, LiDARs, and other things that we can measure ground-based pollution that's near the DC area. So there's a bunch of partners here that I list that we work with in collaboration. So again, what exactly do I do within this? Let me see if this video will play. I like this video a lot. So this video pretty much sums up everything I do. So I pretty much take satellite data and ground-based data and I merge it into a model. So this picture is, this vertical transect is from Calliope, which is the instrument that flies on Calypso satellite from NASA. And you get this swath or measurement that essentially will allow you to see what's in the atmosphere vertically. And then what we do is we just send several different back trajectories and forward trajectories in a modeling context. So sometimes you use it with chemistry, sometimes you do it without, and you can figure out where things are going and where things came from an air quality standpoint. And I tend to use this with fire. And so the model I use is the CMAQ model. So this is the Community Multi-Scale Air Quality Model, which is housed in the EPA, so the Environmental Protection Agency, for those who didn't know. So this model has been developed for plenty of years, and it has like the state-of-the-art science in it. So every time those researchers publish an article that your teachers tell you to read, we put that into this model. So it's really nice, and it's really good, and it allows us to do really, really cool tactics and explore things. And so some of the recent advances that I've found in my research is that taking this model, you can kind of create a situation to where you can take sources in or out. And so what I did was I used a simulation where we covered the entire CONUS, and I removed all sources other than fires. And so you can zone in on what impacts fires are having on the landscape. And you can see this pretty map on the right, where as you expect, you can see the California fires pop up, Idaho, Washington and all the states on the west, as well as you see some areas you might not expect, Louisiana. So I don't know who all knows what goes on in Louisiana, but this is one of the #1 sugarcane burning places in the world. And so that slash and burn, even though it's very, very small pockets of it, creates a very huge source that happens year in and year out. So that shows up even more than the prairie grasslands in Oklahoma and Kansas, which is 1 million to 2 million acres per year. So you got to think about this. This is over a 5-year span of time we're talking about here. And you can see these sources are quite big. And this is all causing pollution almost everywhere across our landscape. And so, so we've seen that over this small period of time that fires are continuing to increase and become worse, and that the PM 2.5 that they're causing, which is already about 40%, is increasing by a factor of 4 over time, just from fires alone. And then ozone over this period of time increased by about 14%. So this is a huge exposure issue that we're running into. And the reason why this is important is because of national ambient air quality standards, where we set a standard of if your city is above this level of pollution, then you have to address it. If it's below, then you're okay. And so that's something we look at. And then, so this is moving on to our Community Vulnerability Health Index, which is something that we've created based off this, was something that the EPA started back in 2015, 2016, where they just kind of looked at our model data that we created, and they just said, well, can we look at it with health? So, and you can. So you can apply that to see how many hospital visits you have related to those pollution that you have based off wildfire. And what we saw is that about 10% of the population at any given point is vulnerable to this fire smoke that's on the landscape. So it might sound like a small number until you realize it's 30 million people, right? And so in the western U.S., it's about 30% of the people there. And then on the Midwest, we're still trying to figure out how do you consider someone vulnerable to wildfire smoke when it's kind of traveled in. So that's an active area of research. And one fact I love to tell people is that you always hear that air quality is getting better. This is sort of true, but it's only half the issue. So my advisor, when I was in grad school, he came up with this nice, cool graphic here, and that clean air trends are getting better, which means that the worst of it, like these power plants, these nasty cars, like the cash for clunkers, all that stuff worked amazingly, and our main pollution is going down. However, the background pollution, which means all the sources combined from every area flying around, that's actually getting dirtier. And so it's air quality might be getting better, but the baseline is getting worse. And what the importance of this, if you look at the figure to the right, you might not be able to see it, is that even though, like for example, ozone, humans are impacted negatively once it crosses about 60 to 70 parts per billion. When you talk about plants and the things we rely on, they're negatively affected around 30 to 40 parts per billion. Can you guess what the background is? About 55, right? So if you're growing plants in a situation to where it's unhealthy for them at all times, you're going to get less yield, you're going to get less plants, you're going to get smaller plants, you're going to get unhealthy plants. Who wants to eat an unhealthy plant? So this is why we have to continue doing this work. And then the last part I'll leave you with this is that the Black, Latinx, and the Native Americans, these communities tend to experience 50% more higher risk when it comes to these type of air quality issues. So again, we all live in the same country, at least at this point, but certain folks of us are not experiencing the same air quality. And so the way I tend to look at that is to figure out how the air got to where it got, right? So we call these non-controllable ozone sources, even though you can do it for PM 2.5 or anything else. So this can include a weather system bringing air to your area. So this is good for an exceptional events demonstration, which means, hey, it wasn't my fault, because this is something that a lot of people will get fined for. These are billion-dollar fines that the EPA can sanction you with. But you can say, hey, this fire was burning in California. It brought pollution over to me. Don't fine me. So this is something I look at in my research. This is kind of an example of a case where we had a blocking high occur over the Central Plains, and it caused fire pollution from California to reach all the way in St. Louis and get sucked down to the surface. And so this is kind of the cool things we can show with this work. And then you also have an example on the right, which you may not be able to see, but this is potential vorticity units, which indicate wave breaking, so stratospheric intrusion kind of coming down. So air from the stratosphere penetrating the troposphere, bringing that ozone-rich air down to the surface. So that's two things that can cause bad ozone to your surface. So essentially frontal passages, if you think of weather systems moving through, which happen all the time. And then so I led an experiment back in 2013, launching ozone sound balloons, and we got a kind of a vertical transect of the atmosphere right over St. Louis. So this is a major Midwestern city. And we was able to figure out that, again, the background ozone was about 55. And like I said, it's unhealthy for plants at 40, bad for people at 70. And this is why those standards matter. And so we have to figure out, how do we balance human and life with our plants and fellow friends? So looking at this, the non-controllable sources that we looked at, biomass burning contribute about 70 to 80% parts per billion to that atmosphere. And so on any given day, you can easily exceed what your standard is based off just having one source contribute to it. And if you're already sitting at 50, it's really easy to push over 70 if you get a fire that sends air there, or a stratospheric intrusion, which will add about 15 parts per billion. So these are things that we have to account for, again. So I'll speed through that. So for those who like tables, I like tables. This is all my modeling stuff I do. But essentially, the point here is that we try to use data assimilation to put into these models to get more accurate information. And what we do with that accurate information is hopefully get better output, right? And so the problem, I like to say, is that the models rely heavily on the inputs. So imagine if you have a teacher that's essentially teaching the wrong information, you're going to essentially put out the wrong information to the world. So you need better teachers, right? So this is what we're trying to do for the models. And what we found out is that the current status of the plume rise code isn't necessarily good. And what is plume rise? It controls the elevation in which your fires go, right? And so if I put the elevation of my smoke at the wrong spot, it's going to get hit by the wrong meteorology, which is going to push it to the wrong area. So if the smoke doesn't go outside of the boundary layer, it's going to stay locally. If it goes above the boundary layer, it's going to go afar. And so that's what we look at. And yeah, and so you can see here kind of where there's a demonstration of this, where we have a local site in California, and then we have different set of simulations of where we keep it at the surface, and then we push it above the surface, and then you let it just kind of propagate around the country, or however it goes in the model. And what we found is that when you only put the plume rise at the surface, which happens sometimes with fires, but not often, you're missing probably about 30 to 40% of the emissions. We found in some cases, you can miss 60% of the transport downwind to another site. So when you actually run your model correctly, or with the right simulations of inputs, you can fix the outputs a lot better. And we see that very quickly. The problem is, how do you do that? We don't always have those instruments to measure those. We don't always have someone who has enough time to go back and do each particular case. So we're trying to figure out ways to automate this, and this is the next forefront of that. Yeah. And so putting it all together, you can kind of see here that the ways I've been trying to fix these models is by doing a bunch of experiments. And so I've taken a laser out to different prescribed burn experiments to figure out how can we better improve those. And one thing is that, again, when you have something burning 20 minutes on the order that's like 5 to 6 acres, a lot of people assume that it won't get above the boundary layer, which can be anywhere between 1.5 kilometers and 4. That's untrue. So a lot of models before used to just drop it at the bottom 20 meters of the surface, saying it'll just mix in. But a lot of times what we notice from our measurements is that it can get well above the boundary layer, and it can affect many, many areas. And so this is something that we've shown quite a bit for different experiments. And then we have our satellite friends who are using the top down. So now we have looking down from the space, and we have looking up from the surface to kind of mix both of those in together. Because it's difficult with satellites is that you're looking through the entire atmosphere, so you can also get a lot of erroneous issues through trying to tease out in your algorithms. So this is something that we're active area research to try to fix that and those issues. Yeah. And so yeah, again, when you have bad inputs, you can get bad outputs. So we have to think, us modelers taking in information from data scientists or measurements or things like that, we're passing our stuff along to someone else. Who's those other people? The end users. So we're talking about epidemiologists, health scientists, other scientists who are relying on model data output. And what's happening is they're receiving our models as if it's ground truth. So they're saying, oh, you give me a number, I can just plug it into my thing and go. And the answer is no, you can't, because we're sending you something with errors to it. You need to understand those errors before you can use it. And so this is a lot of the work I've been trying to do, is to say these are the confidence intervals around this, depending on how you set up your model and how you ran it. And this is what you can do with that data based off how we ran it. And so giving them that data, we found that a lot of studies tend to miss the mortality rates, for example, in a study by 47%, just because they're putting the pollution in the wrong spot. And they're missing the locations of these. They're missing the magnitude of it. So this is a very important study that we're doing. And this is purely just based off where they're allocating the vertical pollution plume at. And so we did a simple study where we looked at some data fusion and machine learning techniques to just figure out, can we determine if the fire is going to go above the boundary layer or stay within the boundary layer, which is what we noticed is a very critical piece to the puzzle. And if you can just get that, you can just shove some of your pollution above that layer. Kind of how you see on this image here, where you're like, if you stop here where the mean of the height is, you're going to miss probably about 50% of what could be above the boundary layer. And so if we can just do a simple yes or no type formulation, then you can get past that issue, which we've developed. And so that's all here on the right. And so, yeah, so kind of, Tracy would be happy with this. Some of the ACAST teamwork, some of the conclusions we found here is that from all these studies is that if you compute the plume rise for small fires less than 500 acres, that'll immediately give you the best bang for your buck. And so this is probably several thousand fires per year, maybe 40,000 or so or more. And this is several million acres. And we're missing out on the transport from those pollution plumes themselves. And this will allow us to quickly improve our modeling. And then the second biggest piece we found is that this notion of fires going to work. I don't know if you've heard of this concept, but a lot of our models set fires to start at 6 a.m. and they come home at 6 p.m. So essentially the emissions just shut off after this 11-hour window. And this is terrible, right? So fires don't act like us and go to work like that, and a lot of us don't go to work like that nowadays. So fires actually don't do this. So what we can do is bring in satellite data to figure out when the fire actually was occurring, when did it start it then, was it active this time period, how long was it active, and then we can push that into the model so it's more realistic. So now you have all the emissions going into the right time frame, which it'll receive the right meteorology, and it'll go the right way. I think this thing is automatically moving, sorry. And so yeah, that's one of the big findings we found. And then the last piece is that we can do this with GOES temporal profiles. So we get 5 minutes, every 5 minutes active fire profiles, and then we can essentially shove this into a modeling case. And so this allows us to do a lot of different things. And so all this on the left was kind of what results from the ACAST team, is that these are some of the major findings we have, and this is some of the work we're still working on. Yeah. And so yeah, so now we move to the state of air quality. For those who don't know, there's a lot of issues to deal with, and I just wanted to put this nice picture up here so you can kind of understand what all goes into these models, and you can kind of get an appreciation for it, right? Like we have anything from storm systems to agriculture sources to radiation, photolysis to vessels to fires, blah, 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 and we have to put all this in a model and make sure it's right. And so with that being said, I like to show these 4 figures here. These are the main things I focus on. And so many of you may appreciate cows. However, they're one of the biggest sources for ammonia in the atmosphere. And so if you've ever been near a cow farm, you'll really realize quickly they don't smell well. Same as pig farms, which is in North Carolina where I used to be for a while. And so fires, volcanoes, and transportation is usually the biggest emitters in terms of movable sources and things that we can look at. And as we know, these things can contribute to fossil fuels such as CO2, and CO2 buildup, we're going to get higher temperatures. And as higher temperatures come, things will really get crazy on this planet. So we don't need that. And it also adds to harmful pollution. So the EPA, quite a bit ago, came up with criteria air pollutants, and I want to give you kind of an update on where we are with these things. So for 3 of these criteria air pollutants, we've done pretty good since 1970 or so. And so the last 20 years, carbon monoxide is down by 65%, woohoo, good. And then lead down 85%, near zero, actually. So that's one of the greatest success stories, I think, in human intervention that we've came up with. If you still have lead in your house, then that's a whole nother issue in itself. Some places still do, but most of it's gone. SO2, this is down 86%, and that was due to a huge effort done in 2000 as well as 2007 where they started shutting down facilities that were producing this, and they really started making regulations to crack down on it. So a lot of these old power plants you may see just sitting there, they're literally just decommissioned them, and that was the quickest way to fix it. So the Clean Air Act and NAAQS actually did its job, so woohoo there. Now, we still got a lot more work to do because there's some not so successful stories. Ozone, still a lot of work. We're just steadily increasing that background, and we don't fully understand why. There are some scientists have suggestions. I have my own, but we can argue there. But we only decreased by 10 parts per billion. We got a long way to go. Like I said, the background in some major cities is 55 or higher, and if the standard is right there at 70, you really don't need much to push you over that edge. And again, if you talk to epidemiologists, they'll tell you over 60, it starts to become negatively impacting for us. If you ever smelled that rotten eggy smell, that's a lot of ozone cooking there. And so you have PM 2.5 or PM, which is particulate matter, that's gone down about 37% in the last 20 years. So our cities don't look like this necessarily in the US, but there's other parts of the world where this is exactly what it looks like. Like I've had some colleagues go to China, for example, and they've been in one building, couldn't see the building next to them. And so this is what all our cities used to look like. And now these places that are kind of hitting their version of industrial revolution, so in India as well, they're kind of going through the same thing. And we got to help them fight to where they don't create the same thing we did back in the 50s and 60s. And then we have nitrogen dioxide. That's down 33%, but we still have a lot of work to do there as we continuously increase our fleet of cars, vehicles, boats, and things like that. Even though people are trying to move to electric, we probably won't be there in the next 30 years. So we got to try to focus on other issues to get this down. And so, yeah, a lot of people talk about switching to renewables. And I like to put these stats up here, is that currently we're about 5% renewable energy for most of the world, with some success cases such as Denmark, where they're at 46%. But we got a lot of work to do there, and that's not going to be the quick and dirty solution because it's very hard to do, to rely on your entire grid off wind or solar or geothermal. So we have a lot of work to do there. Most of us is using coal, about 41%. And so this is something we got to deal with. So switching gears here, now how does this apply to health and air quality? And what I did first, well, I didn't really do this, I forced the students and tortured them. They went through about 700 papers, and they found us kind of anything that related to wildfires and pollution, and they kind of put it together to kind of figure out what is the status of, wildfires and pollution, and how does that fit in? And they did this, so they kind of congealed it down to give us these test cases to where we can try to look at how does wildfires and exposure fit into impact human health and what we can do. And so since, again, this is about 50% of our PM 2.5, we want to try to hit that part heavily as this continues to grow. So this is a current area we're working on. And then, so what we did in that area was we realized quickly that we have all this model data of outputs for fire sources. So you see here the model that I generated quite a bit ago, and we extended it out. So it's from 2008 to 2018, and this is an example using 2015. And what you can do, you can tie it into proprietary health data. So we have a health data grid that we set up that's the same as this model data on 12 kilometers, or even lower in some cases. You can get it down to 1.33, and then you can look at how your air quality data relates directly to your health data. And you can see how many people are impacted from acute stuff, so like missing days off work, all the way up to asthmatic flare-ups, hospital visits, all the way to deaths, right? So you can see all these things and how they correlate. And we can do this is an example of county level. So with this proprietary data, we can actually see at what age they were when these things happened to them. And we can actually see almost down to the day in some cases when they was visiting the hospital and doing things. So we can see based off, there's 5 fires listed here. Camp Fire was a very large fire that occurred in 2018. And we can directly see like which counties in California was exactly impacted. So if you knew which county you lived in, we can warn you, for example, or we can just tell your insurance provider that, hey, this person experienced this many days of bad pollution due to fires, you should actually cover them. And so these are things that we can do to help people out. And the problem is, when you look at these plots, these are mortality, right? So these are people who are losing their lives based off preventable air quality issues. And by preventable, I mean we could give them HEPA filters to fill out their house. We can move people around if we use resources, and we can actually educate people on some of these issues. And so this is like a climate resilience type issue where what is the best way to tell people how to deal with these problems to prevent life loss that I think honestly should be preventable. And then you have morbidity, which is kind of the everything other than you died, right? And so we can see how many people are impacted by this. And usually, again, this is about 5,000 to 10,000 people per year in California alone, right? And so we're trying to develop a tool. So this tool will be good for giving people the information as soon as we have it, right? So like the same way you look at your weather app on your phone before you leave your house, I want you to start looking at your air quality apps to be like, hey, should I go outside and play football today? No, PM 2.5 is really high. You probably should stay in the house and watch Netflix, right? And so this is the idea that I see us going forward. But right now, it's really hard to tell people to not do something on a clear day such as today, right? Like if I told you to stay in the house today and you're like, this is the first day we've been over 60 degrees, it's beautiful outside, you look at me like I'm crazy. But if I said, no, ozone's really bad today, you might lose 2 years of your life. You're like, well, who cares if I die at 68 or 70, right? I'll figure it out then when I get there. And so that's the problem. When you tell people that, your exposure to air quality is bad, you're going to lose 0.25 years of your life based off how long you're exposed to it. They lose you in the weeds. And so we're trying to figure out a way of educating people to think of air quality the same way you would anything else. Like if I told you, breathing in ozone for 8 hours straight at this level is the same thing as jumping off a cliff that's 40 foot, you might consider it different, right? Especially without a parachute or anything else, or water below you, right? And so, so this is kind of the idea behind this tool. And then again, this is a nice, pretty plot to kind of show you in high wildfire years such as 2008, 2012, and 2018, you can see the spikes in deaths go up pretty quickly. And so you don't want to breathe that stuff in. So if we tell you to stay home, probably should. Anyways, but this is a nice map of how much money it costs. So a lot of people don't, again, care about life, so we always talk about money, which I hate having to do, but it matters. So we're talking on the order of 80 to 100 billion per year based off wildfire issues. And again, a lot of this isn't necessarily structural stuff or burning property. This is actually human life loss and hospital visits, people going to work, and all these type of things factored in. So these are all things we can work to better. Yeah. So the last part, I'll briefly go through an environmental justice type example, and so you can kind of get a sense of how all this ties together, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I like to tell people this not so fun fact. I won't use names, I'll just use numbers. So I don't know what political allegiance people have in the room. But so here's the fun thing. So first day of the 44th president of the United States, when he came in, he created a climate plan. It was an 8-year effort. So he got into things like the Paris agreements, and we joined in 2015, right? All good. First day of the 45th president of the United States, he stopped that 44th president's climate action plan, and it completely eliminated it. So we got out by that March 17th of that same year that he came into power. And actually empowered a lot of the power plans from the coal folks and said he wanted to empower that commission. We got out of the Paris agreements. And it was effective in 2020, actually, but even though we started in 2017. Fast forward, first day of the 46th president of the United States, we got back into the 44th president of the United States executive order to be in the climate action plan, which we finally rejoined in 2021. So you can see how EJ and climate resilience should not be political, because last time I checked, the planet doesn't care who you vote for. Air quality doesn't care who you vote for. We all breathe the same air, relatively speaking, of course. There's some disparities there. I'll talk about that later. But we all mostly are living on the same planet. I have to interact with you, you have to interact with me. Whether you like me or not, it's irrelevant. So it's like, who cares who you voted for? We need to push forward with this climate together, because we're all going to experience it. If this planet goes to you-know-where, guess where we live? And last time I checked, the folks at NASA haven't figured out a way to get us to Mars safely yet. So don't use that as a backup, folks. Anyways, and so part of what we do is we create these really cool maps to kind of let folks know their vulnerabilities, and we call it a Community Vulnerability Health Index. And so what this index does, it takes into all your factors, such as how much air quality you're exposed to, how many days you're exposed to it, what area you live in, what's near you, what's not near you, and it looks at what you can do based off your area to mitigate those, and it tells you how vulnerable you are. And so that's a cool tool we made. And then we kind of can quickly tell folks if you live in like the Northwest, for example, you're going to be more vulnerable than most people in the United States. If you live in states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, pretty much screwed when it comes to air quality. However, there's things you can do. So this is kind of stuff that's cool we can show people for the first time, is that regardless of political lines, regardless of how you feel, this is what your vulnerability is, and this is what you can do to fix it. And then inside this, we like to look at what we call adaptive capacity. So this is your ability to mitigate these issues that we called out. And also your sensitivities and your vulnerabilities, meaning what are all the things you're facing and what are all the things you're vulnerable to based off where you live. And you can see here on this map to the bottom left, mostly the Southeast U.S., the Midwest, and the West Coast. A lot of this is fire-based. And so fire-based, and then you have the power generation sector that's heavily in the kind of northeast, Midwest, following the Ohio River, pretty much. And so with that known, we can now get down to the county level, zip code level, and we can start to help people fight back. So that's the main thing we've realized is that fixing things at the federal levels tends to be really slow. If you've ever worked with the government, you know how slow things move. But working on the local level, we can actually have a fighting chance. And so that's where we're trying to focus our efforts. So we can actually get down to the county that has a problem. We can reach out to those folks directly. And so here's an example. My family's from Alabama, so I kind of cherry-picked this one out. But Alabama State, we could tell that there are 6 counties that popped up immediately, and we can know the name of those counties, and we could tell you how many people live there. So about 108,000 people experience bad air quality every year at these places, and there's currently nothing being done in these areas. But now we can highlight issues and things they can do to prevent that. So this is kind of a cool tool. So there's a lot of people out here that say, oh, you might just be saying something, you might not be able to prove it. We can prove it now. We can prove with a shadow of a doubt that you're actually experiencing bad air quality. And we can show you how much to the day, to the T. And now it's hard for people to combat that other than saying, I don't want to do anything. And it's hard to get somebody to admit that. So again, we can do this anywhere. So this tool is really powerful. We can zoom in on any particular part of the United States. And we've broken it up into sectors because each of these sectors we felt had different issues. And so each issue will have to be addressed differently. And so that's how we're kind of moving forward. And again, I want to keep harping on this stat in the side to keep it in the back of your minds. So we're talking about 200,000 to 500,000 deaths per year. 300,000 is the average. And this is just depending on El Nino versus La Nina. So wet versus cold and dry seasons and things like that changes. And then in the U.S., we're talking about 5,000 to 12,000 deaths per year. So this is pretty important for us to address. And then for the D.C. area, I like to give you this pretty fun example. A lot of people like to think D.C. is a melting pot. I used to think so before I moved there, but it's pretty segregated. It's very segregated, and I'll show you how segregated here in a second. But so there are about a lot of people there, 75,000, and 68 square miles. And the thing is that it's almost 50% black, right? And they used to call it Chocolate City back in the day, but it's starting to slowly not be as chocolate. And then 14% of these people are foreign-born, and most people there make way under what they need to survive there, which is about 82,000. It might sound like a lot until you go to D.C. and realize making 82,000 there is like making 20,000 to 30,000 anywhere else. And then you have about 16% poverty rate within that, and it's also very dangerous, but we won't talk about that today. So I like to tell people this quote that I kind of made up. Climate change doesn't care about how you feel, doesn't care about what you think. It's happening. And there's a lot of people that feel like it's a far-off future thing. Even though we run these fancy climate scenarios where we look 100 years out, 200 years out, this is not the time frames we're actually talking about. These things are going to happen 5 to 10 years, and some of them are already happening now. So you've seen a lot of flooding. You've seen a lot of strengthening storms. You've seen a lot of hurricane intensifications. You've seen a lot of tornadoes ripping things up, a lot of things happening in places they've never happened before. And we keep saying it every year. Like I tell people in the fire world, we've been talking about this has been the greatest fire year on record since 2012. So imagine almost over a decade straight saying, oh, this is the greatest fire year on record. Well, eventually you're going to be like, well, we're in a new climate regime, obviously, because it can't continuously break records if that's the thing. So again, when it comes to environmental justice, part of the adaptability is the ability to afford to be able to do so. So if you have, in D.C., for example, the average black family's net worth is about $3,500, which, if you only have that in your bank account, what are you really doing with yourself, right? And then you have the average white family have $284,000, which, for net worth isn't the highest number, but it's still way different than the other number. And so your ability to adapt to issues that happen aren't as simple when you can't afford to do so. So if I tell you, oh, the EPA's created this great HEPA filter that'll filter out anything that happens, and you say, I can't afford that, or I don't have the time, the ability to understand because I'm too busy raising 5 kids, blah, 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 I'm doing this by myself, it's really hard to adapt to things. It's really hard to want to listen to a scientist. You're not going to those meetings. You're not doing these things. So again, this is the last thing I'll show before I get to conclusions. This map right here is really near and dear to my heart as an asthma person. And so this is comparing asthma to race in D.C. So this map right here shows the split between Latin, black neighborhoods, and then the white neighborhoods on the left. And it's pretty pronounced. And then you look at this image on the right, this shows the emergency visits. And you can see that it gets yellow, orange to red in the areas that's more diverse. And it's typically green on the areas that's more white. And so this is kind of a clear-cut issue. It's almost like the air quality is intentionally coming after minorities, which is kind of weird, right? So you can take a grain of salt with however you feel like that was set up, or whether it was systematic or whatever you want to call it. I'm not a politician, so I can't speak to it that way. But from a scientific standpoint, we can clearly see. And so when you compare these things, you can quickly see right here that all these neighborhoods over here are highly affected by pollution, which causes mortality rates and morbidity rates to go up really, really high. And it's really pronounced. And you can quickly see it with the data. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, which I was one, but no, don't take one to find this out. So with that, folks, I'm going to head to the conclusions, and then we'll take some questions. So yeah, all in all, we need to conduct more population equity analysis, is what I've noticed, because we need to bring in a sociology scientist, because telling people numbers, data, facts, and statistics I've found does not work for a change in action, and I don't know what really will. Maybe the sociologist folks will, so that's what I hope. And then we're going to continue to build tools to empower the folks that do care, and then get the PR campaign going to try to get the folks that don't care to know. And then we're going to continue to build this vulnerability index and keep improving that so we can better inform the population of what's out there and what's going on, because I feel like informed people can do things more than non-informed people. And then we want to continue to conduct this analysis looking at fires and how fires affect the landscape. So with that, I want to show you some cool pictures, and we get out of here. So this is my group. This is sort of part of it. I have a bigger group than this, but this is some of the members. And then this is some of my interns that help work with this with NASA. So this is NASA SARP. This is the summer internship program. We put a bunch of students on a big old plane, and they fly around and get really sick sometimes, and it's kind of funny. But yeah, and then this is us getting on the plane. So I want to acknowledge all my funders and everyone else. And again, thanks everybody for coming out. Appreciate you. Oh, and I really like this picture, so I'm going to show you all this anyway.
Thank you very much. Lots of important stuff in there, and I would like to invite the audience to ask questions of Professor Wilkins.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm actually really interested in air quality, and I'm pursuing a career in it, so this is like something
nice.
really, interesting to me. I know you talked a little bit about the EPA, and I was wondering if your research has ever like intertwined with like regulations or have like impacted like local or national regulations and policy.
Yeah, so great question. So the funny thing about your question is I actually worked at the EPA for 4 years. Yeah, so directly. Yeah, so what the model that I was talking about, I didn't go into too much detail about it, but the CMAQ model is literally designed by the EPA. So it's in-house, so we was in the Office of Research and Development, and we used to pass it to the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, who do the regulations. So the model is directly designed purely for regulatory use. So everything that we did essentially tweaked their regulations. And so a lot of the science that people pull in, we pull into the model. That's why we're legally obligated to pull in the state-of-the-art science. So therefore, we can pass it to the regulatory writers. And yeah, it's a very slow process. So like, for example, the ozone regulatory process took about 10 years just to lower it down 5 parts per billion. Yeah, so these things move very, very slow. But yeah, great question. And yeah, we need more people in the fight, so join.
Anybody? Oh, all right.
Oh, Tracy, yeah. Oh, for those who don't know, wait for the question. This is me out in the field experiment with my hazmat mask on. Because I have a beard, as you can see, so I wear a full face.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. This was such an interesting talk. And so one question that I've been sort of hearing different sides to ties together the two sides of your talk, which is, you were mentioning that these exceptional event demonstrations are used to say not our fault. Yeah. Don't blame us for the smoke. And there's value to that because obviously there is a lot of smoke. On the other hand, that some cities are using those as a way to avoid the regulatory requirements. And actually the consequences have environmental justice consequences because the health disparities within a city are mainly coming from local sources, not the periodic inflow. And I was just curious if you could kind of reflect on how the wildfire work interacts with the environmental justice and regulatory implications.
Okay, so that's a two-parter I would answer. The first part is people who are in the power generation sector are very wise. And they're I call them the early climate fighters. They knew everything and they just didn't tell us. So they would put power plants on the edge of borders of counties or cities, and they would let all the pollution flow right into someone else's. So they'd be like, we're creating it, the local people might breathe it, but the mass brunt of it is going somewhere else, so we can't really be detected at certain levels. They'll put detectors in certain places so it's not detected, as you well know. And so when it comes to fires, we need actually more fires is what I tell people. And so this is the hard sell, because you have local folks, like for example in Washington State, there's the last couple generations aren't used to fires happening all the time compared to maybe 4 or 5 generations ago. So trying to convince everybody that we need more, it's like, do you really want Seattle to be more smoky than it is now? And it's like, yes, we actually do need it to be. Otherwise, you're going to have huge fires on the landscape. And trying to sell that to people has been very difficult. And so that's why I said we need to partner with the sociologist folks, because we're going to have to. Because in order for us to have a safer planet, we need more fire. And if we look back historically speaking, when the indigenous folks were running this country, or this continent, let me say, because borders were different, is that they had way more fires. They were running way more fires. And they now mimic that, or closely mimic that, in the kinds of prairie like the Oklahoma, Kansas area. And so they're trying to recreate what they used to do back in the day because they had a healthy, safe planet. And so we'll see. Sorry for that long-winded answer. But yeah, it's a we'll see answer, because it's a great question, because we need more. And we did a study recently where we looked at 6 different scenarios where it's like business as usual, where we keep things the same. We have a whole bunch of fires on this end, or we have no fires, slightly interactions. And we know we need to add more, is essentially what that answer is. But how do you convince people? I don't know. Yeah. Stay tuned.
Thanks for being here today, Dr. Wilkins.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I see in our weather apps that we're getting air quality indexes in the last year or so. Mm-hmm. Are those sources for that data as accurate as the ones you were suggesting earlier? And then also, just a little local pride. I'm wondering if you knew that the GOES 16 and GOES 17 satellites, fire detection and lightning detection, was pioneered with meteorologists, atmospheric, oceanic, and space science on this campus.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
good.
Big goals.
On Wisconsin.
Is that what that means? I had a pillow that said that. I was wondering. Anyways, but so to repeat the question, sorry, what was the first part?
Air quality
Okay,
index.
yeah, with the apps. Yeah, so yes and no is a weird way to answer that, because it depends on the app. So some apps rely purely on the AQI index that's already published by the EPA. So that's relatively accurate, except the model domains that they use sometimes isn't helpful. So if I'm using a 12-kilometer domain and you're in a certain part of that kilometer domain, it's probably not going to be that accurate for you, right? And it also depends on how close you are to the monitors and how accurate the data is. It was talking about the inputs, right? So if we have bad inputs, or you have sparse inputs, like if you're in a regional location where there is no monitor, then you kind of got to go with what you got. And that's what the models kind of help out, and the satellite data help out, thanks to the GOES folks and stuff like that. And so that's where all that comes into play. So like you're right, if you're in a city area, then it's probably very accurate. But if you're in a rural area, then it's probably not. But unless that rural area has a monitor out there. Because the AQI data set it's placed strategically depending on what the EPA cared about, right? And so we know people don't always live near monitors. So yeah, so it's probably the best thing to use now. But this is going to improve that, because we take that data into account too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, keep working on that GOES data, yeah.
Earlier, you were talking about how there's a lot more, at least quicker progress at the local level than at the federal level when it comes to making improvements. So what would you say specifically can be done by someone like me who doesn't know a lot about local politics or things like that to support people who are pushing for the most action on these issues?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, which is interesting. I'm not a policy person, but I'm trying to become one, same as you, right? And so the first thing you can do is arm yourself with the current issues of the area you live in or the area you care about, right? And usually you can do that. There's a lot of local groups. You'd be surprised how many local groups are already doing this. There's a lot of climate action groups, and you can align yourself with them, and that's usually what I do. So I go talk to the local people and say, what is the issues? What are you breathing? What are you dealing with? And usually people know. Like if you go to a place where, you know, this farm over here is causing all this pollution, they'll tell you quickly. They're like, these people are the issue. We see it. We do. Yeah, they'll let you know. And so that's usually the first way, is to educate yourself on it. And then you can go to those communities, and then you can figure out what they need, and then figure out how to get them that. Because a lot of times people, what we do is we provide the modeling tools for them, right? So we say, you know there's an issue with this power plant, but I can tell you exactly how much and when the pollution is coming out of here. And now you can arm yourself with that scientific data when you go to argue at the courts or whatever, right? So now they're like, yeah, on July 5th, there was this much pollution from you. It wasn't from the fireworks, right? And now you'd be like, oh, okay, now it's our fault. We have to do something. Because like Tracy mentioned earlier, a lot of these places lie. Yeah, and then think about it. If I have a sensor on my own facility, you think I'm going to let it tell you the truth? Yeah, I run the sensor on my facility. I'll let the data come out, or something magically happens to the data on the bad day, right? Oh, it was erroneous. They do this all the time, and they know they do. Or they take the fine, right? Yeah. Is there a question? I thought.
Yes, I have a question, just kind of following up with the wildfires. So when you say like trying to convince people that we need more fires, do you mean kind of like having more prescribed burns so that we're controlling like the land that is burning to better avoid like the large wildfire events?
So we need more fires in general. So wildfires are a natural needed part. And the problem is, what I call it the wildland-urban interface, is the term that they coined a while back, is that humans now live where fire should be. That's the issue. So we're the same as I call like little prairie rabbits and things like that, to where we build our little homes and houses, have our babies there, and fires come and burn it down. We don't want that to happen. So unlike rabbits, we have the ability to just stop the fire, which is bad, right? So a lot of times, like I always use this example, like Oprah and Ellen, for example, they put a house in a really nice neighborhood that a fire should be able to go through. The fire came and burned their house down, right? But they're multi-millionaires, billionaires now, and they can actually cause the Forest Service themselves to go fight that fire. So now you're putting firefighters at risk. You're putting air resource managers at risk to fight a fire that should naturally be able to go through this area. And so in 2016, there was a good example in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. If you've ever been to Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg, Tennessee, you know what's there. Tourism, right? So this area is pretty much like Vegas of the East without the gambling, right? And so there's a bunch of like little places you can go for your family, drink moonshine, all that cool stuff. And fire came through there and wiped out quite a bit of it. And so people were really upset, and they lost millions of dollars because of that. But it's like, you put it in the middle of a mountain. What did you expect was going to happen? The mountain's called the Smokies, right? It's called the Smoky Mountains because it's on fire all the time. So humans have really put themselves in positions to where we can't let the earth do naturally what it's supposed to do. And that's the biggest issue. That's why we need more fires. We prevented so many of them. And this is the same reason why the Forest Service was created. So there was a fire, I think in 1904, that burned like 3 states. And so they had to enlist the Army, the Buffalo Soldiers, everybody went out there to Washington State to try to stop this fire. And it was so bad then, because they have texts and phones and stuff. So they literally was going door to door and knocking on people's house saying, the fire's coming, gotta get out of here. So a lot of people died, right? And then the Forest Service was created to fight all fires. And that was what I talk about as the propaganda that caused the issue. And so since early 1900s, we've been fighting all fires with that same mentality. And that's the problem. So we have to change our mindset we need to just move out of its way. Because there's certain cycles, like some places burn every 300 years, some places burn every 100 years, 20, whatever, and we need to let that happen. So, yeah. So we'll see. Thanks for your question, though.
I think we got time for one more. If anyone, David? Yep.
I feel like you mentioned about Seattle being one of the highest, or cities with the highest amount of smoke. Is that correct?
No, so I just use that as an example because I have a lot of friends that were there when a bunch of fires were happening, and they couldn't be in their house So it's usually on the path, because think about it, a lot of the fires happen in Northern California, and so a lot of the weather systems immediately push the air directly north, and so Seattle's usually in that path, and it usually catches a lot of the smoke, yeah.
So like, well, my question was like, I feel like the northwestern part has the, I believe like Seattle's one of the richest cities in the U.S. So like,
Yeah.
what kind of different strategies do they have from like, generated from the like the biggest adaptability or biggest freedom, or like to mitigate what the health risks?
Oh, you're saying what can they do?
Yeah,
Or
from
what
the
are they
smoke
doing? He's saying what can they do or what are they doing?
What kind of strategies do they have?
Well, so part of the problem is they don't. That's what we're trying to develop, right? And so trying to talk to people who have the money to say no to fires is hard. Because if you live in Seattle, you don't want more smoke. And we're trying to tell them from a health standpoint of the forest, you need more smoke. And they're like, no, we're good. And so it's like trying to fight that. And like you said, a lot of the people there have money because, so they could do some of these things like just go away when the fires happen, not live next to the fires. So we try to tell some people, don't live too close to the forest or don't live too close to a place that's supposed to burn all the time. The same way you try to tell someone in Miami don't live near the beach, it's really hard to do. It's like, this issue eventually is going to be a big problem. People go, nah, I'll just wait for that problem to happen. And so just like most people in Seattle don't have a central air system, right? So they can't really filter out most of the air coming in. They have like heaters and things, that's about it. And so like trying to rebuild the structures of these homes and buildings is another thing they could do. But you have a lot of places that's been around for a long time. So it's really hard to spend that money because of your air quality issues is what they look at us like, right? They go, yeah, we'll figure it out later. So that's why I said the social scientists are really needed because I don't really know how to deal with that. So it's a great question. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Professor
Appreciate
Wilkins. Yeah. All right, and that wraps us up for the academic year. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, enjoy y'all
Fill
summer.
out your evaluations, please. I read them. I make changes.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Pleasure.
That was so much info right